You are watching or listening to Purham and Associates. For more information, go to rperham.com or follow me on all social media platforms and subscribe at RPURHAM. Thanks. See you over there. Hey, good day to you all. Welcome to Permanent Associates. I'm your host, Randy Purham. I don't know why the thing didn't want to click over. But hey, I hope y'all are doing well and you're getting through the week just fine. And we got a very special guest with us, a returning guest. A lot of y'all know who he is. But for those that don't know, and you're probably like a new audience base, or new to the show rather, we have none other than John O'Connor. He's the author of Postgate, and he is an experienced trial lawyer practicing law in San Francisco since 1972. He has tried cases in the state and federal court throughout the country. He served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Northern California from 1974 to 1979, representing the United States in both criminal and civil cases. Among his interesting assignments have been representation of the government during the OPEC oil embargo of the 1970s, writing Fifth Amendment and state of mind briefs for the prosecution in the United States versus Patricia Hearst, representing the FDIC, FSLC, and the RTC during the savings and loan crisis of the late 1980s and early 1990s, representing California Attorney General Dan Lundgren in campaign-related litigation, defending R.J. Reynolds Tobacco in significant smoking and health litigation, representing Coach Don Nelson in litigation with the Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban, and representing with W. Mark Felt regarding the revelation of his identity as Deep Throat. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing some, presenting the others, Mr. John O'Connor. Good morning, sir. Welcome. How you doing today?
Good to be with you, Randy.
Absolutely. John, give us an update. You was on here before, so for those that know who you are from this through this program, give us an update as to what you've been up to the last few months.
Well, mainly what I've been doing is I've been, again, looking at current events, and I just try to pick out various topics to weigh in on that I think need clarification. And I'm really in the same space as you are in a sense, Randy, because I feel the mainstream media just doesn't do its job. And it is apparent every day. And you can't have a democracy unless you have a functioning media so that information can be spread about and we can have our democratic discussions. And they don't seem to be occurring in many quarters in our country.
Yeah.
So, for example, I just wrote an article, and I publish articles really, and do some shows like yours. I just wrote an article about how in this pipe bomb case, why the delay of the FBI in 5 years in solving this case, why that happened, and when the conservative side of the world says that there's some sort of a conspiracy in the FBI delaying the investigation, I'm saying that was not irrational, that the FBI did lay down, and so the media wants to blame the delay on conspiracy theories, whereas the delay in that case, I know, I'm a former federal prosecutor, I understand the way the FBI works. If the FBI were not acting in a partisan fashion for Biden, this crime would have been solved 4 years ago, but it wasn't. And it wasn't until Trump came in that people in the FBI got up off their duffs and solved it. But that's just an example of what I do. I wrote the book Postgate about how the Washington Post really covered up Watergate and began today's partisan advocacy journalism. And that's really what my theme is, that the media went awry in 1972 because they realized they could get riches and political power. Watergate gave political power to the Washington Post and the New York Times, which jumped on the bandwagon, and everybody hailed them as being the watchdogs of our democracy. And really, they actually were covering up and distorting what had happened in Watergate. But that's where it all started. That's where the modern press, if you're a journalist going to grad school, the first thing they tell you about is Watergate, and how if you do a Watergate, you're going to be rich and famous, and you're going to do your job, and you're going to affect regime change, because that's your job, is to get the right politicians in office. And so in so doing, we distort the whole functionings of our democracy. Those folks are supposed to provide information for democratic debate. They're not out to close debate or to close the information available to us. And that's exactly what happened. So thank God for people like you, Randy, today. And that's why Watergate is not as possible today as it was in 1972. This stuff just doesn't fly. It tries to get off the ground with the mainstream media, and we tend to correct things.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for that, John. Postgate, Watergate was so long ago. It was before I was born, and I'm old. I'm an old man now. I got grandkids. So a lot of people don't remember, outside of go to Google, of course, or watching some old documentary or what have you. Talk to us about Watergate and then Postgate, what led up to Watergate, what happened with Watergate, and where we are, I guess you could say currently with it all.
Sure. Before the 1972 election, which President Nixon was going to win in a landslide, he had the thing locked. It was very clear. There was an odd burglary of the Democratic National Committee headquarters on June 17, 1972, involving some people involved in his campaign, and some weird group of ex-operatives on the Bay of Pigs that were sort of Cuban militants who were trying to retake Cuba years earlier. And so it's this odd amalgam of people, two of whom were ex-CIA men who had led the Bay of Pigs invasion which was an abortive attempt by the John Kennedy's regime. It really wasn't John Kennedy who did it, but tried to invade Cuba. So eventually, the Washington Post broke these sensational stories that led people to believe that this was a plot that had come from the White House, rather than being this odd event that the White House was scratching its head over. The White House didn't know what had happened, but the Post did very quickly afterwards, and they understood the opposite of what they reported. They understood that this was really about listening to out-of-town men at the Democratic headquarters and young women down the street arranging for the night's festivities. And the CIA was involved because the CIA protected the bordello down the street, and they used this to compromise people of interest, which the CIA is doing today. I mean, there's no secret about that. They're doing it in every foreign country, and it's part of their duty. They were doing it in the United States, but it was illegal if they did it in the United States. So they were using the White House as cover to do these operations. The Post knew this, but they spun it as a Nixon White House out of control. And there was a Democratic Congress, Democratic Senate. Everything got very excited. My client, Mark Felt, had been giving Bob Woodward of the Washington Post tips on what was happening and the FBI investigation. And Woodward and Bernstein took that and they distorted it somewhat. It was true stuff my client was giving them, but they took it to mean that they had the White House nailed in the Oval Office. It didn't, but it caused the downfall of Richard Nixon, the conviction of 40 people.
Wow.
Nixon had to leave office, was one of the most popularly elected presidents in our history. And so basically what I talk about in Postgate, and most people don't know, is this whole thing. If there was a cover-up, it was by the media, not by the White House. The White House did not know what had happened. They were scratching their collective heads, and the Post knew all about it. So I get into it. If you read my book, you will see, without a doubt, history's most important internal scandal, most important domestic scandal, probably in world history. It altered a very successful presidency, altered our political landscape in many ways.
Yeah.
And it was all the result of media dishonesty. And so history, this is an important history book because there have probably been hundreds of books written on Watergate, and people don't, even these bright scholars, don't understand what happened. Only now, there are a couple other books. I'm not the only fellow who's written about this, but there are only a few of us out here who have done this, and it's an important part of our history.
Yeah, that was like been there, done that. It was part of all that, and I appreciate you, John, for bringing that up and telling us about this. A fun fact that I did read about Watergate was that the reason why those spies were caught was because the door, in the door jamb, the tape was facing horizontal versus vertical, and the security, the night watch, noticed that and caught those guys. So look, that was a little fun fact, piece of information there.
And let me tell you this: one of the things that people don't understand is the lead burglar from the CIA had told all the other burglars that he had removed the tape.
Yeah.
Because the tape was only needed to get in, not to get out. Everybody was already in. Why did he keep the tape on? Yeah. He kept the tape on because there was a CIA operative, and I explained it in my book. There was a CIA operative that still had to get in because the CIA operative was going to lurk outside the DNC headquarters to get information that they didn't want anyone in the Nixon administration to see, even the low-level guys who knew about this.
Yeah.
And so I talk about how that tape being on there is a direct result of this. And nobody's ever really got into why that tape was as it was. And the tape is a whole story that I explain.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, I highly encourage you all to pick up the book Postgate and check it out. It's almost like a thriller. And it says made for TV book. I look forward to getting that, seeing you get that into production. But I want to jump into the idea of these independent agencies. What we know affectionately as the bureaucracy, and how they operate under the, I guess you could say, the disguise of wielding executive power, but the president doesn't have the authority to fire them. And you would think, by the president being the executor of the country, and he's the leader of the executive branch, if you have these agencies under you that are doing things that may be contrary to what your agenda is, you have the right to fire them. Just like a boss, a CEO of a company, you have employees that you send out to do something, they do something wrong, you fire them. But in our government, we have this weird relationship where, nope, we can't. You can't fire them. So, talk to us about. I'm gonna play this audio clip, and I want to get your thoughts on the back end, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Supreme Court hearing on Trump versus Slaughter, and this was just recently. This is just last week, and it's an interesting take. It's although the audio is 2.5 hours, I'm only going to play about 5-6 minutes of it to get the context here of what this whole thing is about. So pay attention, folks.
President's power to remove and thus supervise those who wield executive power on his behalf follows from the text of Article 2, was settled by the first Congress, and has been confirmed by precedent, including at least 9 decisions of this court from Ex parte Hennon through Trump against United States. Humphrey's executor stands as an indefensible outlier from that line of authority. Its holding that federal agencies can exercise quasi-legislative and quasi-judicial powers that form no part of the executive power has not withstood the test of time. That holding was gutted and refurbished in Morrison, but this court correctly rejected the refurbished version as providing an amorphous test with no limiting principle. Respondent now proposes a third update to Humphreys, which this court has already rejected as making no logical or constitutional sense. Humphreys must be overruled. It has become a decaying husk with bold and particularly dangerous pretensions. It was grievously wrong when decided, and cases from Morrison to Trump have thoroughly eroded its foundations. The court has repudiated Humphrey's reasoning and confined it to its facts, but it continues to generate confusion in the lower courts, and it continues to tempt Congress to erect, at the heart of our government, a headless fourth branch, insulated from political accountability and democratic control. As Justice Thomas wrote in Selah Law, Humphreys poses a direct threat to our constitutional structure and, as a result, the liberty of the American people. And as Selah Law held, the modern expansion of the federal bureaucracy sharpens the court's duty to ensure that the executive branch is overseen by a president accountable to the people. I welcome the court's questions.
General Sauer, could you give us one example of a permissible restriction on the authority to remove a principal officer?
We don't believe there are permissible restrictions on principal officers of the United States who exercise the executive power. Now, there may be separate issues relating to particular historical pedigrees.
In this case, in a multi-body agency such as the FTC, is there any permissible restriction?
No, this court in Trump against the United States held that the president's power to remove officers wielding the executive power is conclusive and preclusive.
How far do you go with that? Can it be arbitrary, completely arbitrary?
It is conclusive and preclusive, so any review of arguably bad reasons for the president to remove an executive officer would be subject to the political process. It would not be subject to judicial review, and certainly not subject to statutes regulating that.
Okay. They said something very key there. Although there was much more I want us to listen to, but it just kind of like clicked something. Going back to what we were just talking about, the political process versus a judicial review of a situation, especially dealing with the president. If the president is has the authority under Article 2, section Article 2 of the Constitution, let's say section. To run the government the way he sees fit, in a sense, then if he's firing somebody, why would that be subjected to the judicial review versus, it's politics, hey, have a nice life? What's going on there, John?
Well, historically, there has always been a tension, and the framers meant it, between the three branches of government. There's sort of a gray area between each branch. And Humphrey's executor is just an example of the idea. Here's what happens. The legislature creates an executive agency, but they don't want it to really have unbridled executive power because, after all, the executive they fear the executive. They don't necessarily want the executive to have prerogatives. So they institute this thing and claim that the body is independent. Then we skip to the judiciary, which is there with its gavel, saying, you, the executive, shall not do anything to interfere with the actions of this agency, and if you don't like it, if you don't like the guy who's running it, you can't fire him.
Yeah.
So what happens is the effect is that those two branches of government are keeping the executive from doing his job. They're inserting these independent people. This is a deep state type of thing.
It is.
This whole thing about executive agencies is really much of it is deep state, and you try to create somebody, an agency with unbridled power, protected by the judiciary, started by the legislature, and the executive is nowhere to be found. So this basically, and so this case is very important, because the last vestige of this, and the most important vestige, is this case called Humphrey's Executor, which holds that so-called independent agencies, boy, they can do whatever they want, and if you try to interfere with them, we can go to the courts, and the judges can rule, no, you can't fire that person. No, we don't think your reason is good enough for firing this person. You can't. It's not just a for-cause standard. No, and what they're arguing here is, look, the president can fire who he wants to fire. It's his job, and it's not the judges to say whether that's rational, and it's not the legislature to say you can't do it.
Right.
If they start an executive agency, and maybe the president didn't even want it, by the way, if they start that executive agency, or at least maybe the succeeding president didn't want it. In other words, maybe the Democrats want something, they put it in a legislative, or they put it in an executive agency, and they don't want any succeeding Republicans to deal with it. This way, the courts say, look, if the executive gets popularly elected, he ought to be able to come in and lay waste to that agency, and certainly he can fire the heads of it and direct the operation. I'm not against civil service protection, and that's another matter for someone down the line and so forth. But as long as the control of that agency is within the executive function, and the president can hire and fire the top guys, then our system is working. And so you combine then some civil service reform, as happened around, the time of Garfield and so forth. You combine that with the executive function, and you're fine. You've got a decent balance there, and it works. But we've had these independent agencies, and it's bedeviled any conservative White House.
Yeah, I agree with you there. It goes along with the traditions and the customs that we always had in this country with the exchange of administrations. The outgoing president takes his cabinet and his flunkies with them, and the new administration comes in and they do their thing. Whether they want to override or revamp the things that the previous administration has done, but this has been normal protocol for the last 2.5 centuries. And so I'm like utterly confused as to why, and I guess I'll go back to the clip here, the audio, because they kind of get into this a little bit. I believe this is Justice Kagan talking, and she's asking him, why do you want us to unravel what we already established? she's looking for justification, because he's making a great point. He's like, y'all are these independent agencies don't have the right nor the constitutionality to do what they're doing. So we need to go back to the way it's always been, prior to this debacle. And she's like, why? Why do you want us to change the government? So it's interesting. It's changed. So I'm gonna get back to that. We're gonna talk about that.
I think there are a lot of agencies in the federal government where it's hard to parse whether it's an executive function they're engaged in or a legislative function. We obviously have the Purham case that they're holding, where you're dealing with the Library of Congress, which half of it's a library, half of it's things like the copyright. What are we supposed to do with that, if you're correct?
Well, Mr. Chief Justice, in Free Enterprise Fund, this court, I think, very aptly stated that the vast and varied nature of the federal government is a reason not to make general pronouncements on issues that haven't been briefed and argued. There are certainly situations where there are tough line drawing problems. You raised the Perlmutter case as one that may raise arguments of that nature, but by and large, the sort of insight that goes from Morrison to FCC against Arlington and to SEALA law recognizes that these multi-member agencies that are exercising what this court has repeatedly recognized as quintessential executive powers, like the FTC, rulemaking, adjudication, prosecution, investigation, seeking of civil enforcement power, litigation, seeking civil enforcement powers, or civil enforcement remedies, and so forth. Those are not close cases.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate your point about not deciding cases that aren't before us, and I meant the Purham murder case as an example. But I'm not sure you answered the question. Is this a severance issue? Do we so the agency is okay so long as half of it survives in one branch and half in the other? And if so, who gets to decide that?
For the vast majority of these agencies, I think Seal Law pointed out there's maybe about 24 executive agencies that are multi-member structure and have removal authority. I think the logic of this court adopted it for severability in Free Enterprise Fund and Seal Law, and Collins indicates that in the vast majority of cases there would be an excision just of the removal authority. Now, if there are agencies that kind of straddle the line between legislative and executive, that might present harder severability concepts.
Why is that severability the issue? Meaning, if you think they're wielding power that is inappropriate, why don't we sever that power?
I think those very arguments...
Instead of the removal power.
Well, for example, consider an agency like the FTC, which is before the court. Virtually all of its powers, I can't think of a power that exercises...
But most of those powers were part of Humphreys. This court, even in Sheila Law, and all of the cases you've mentioned since, have said that Humphreys is controlling law. You're asking us to overturn a case that has been around for nearly 100 years, correct?
90 years, I believe.
90 years. What other cases have we overturned that have had a pedigree of 100 years?
Pennoyer against Neff was overruled by Schaefer against Heitner on its 100th birthday.
That was an economic case. What other case?
For example, Erie overruled a Swifty Tyson 96 years later. Those are two examples. There's at least 13
But which other case has fundamentally altered the structure of government?
He gave you two.
For over 100 years, actually since 1887, we've had multi-member boards, and that's the entire government structure.
The distortion of the structure of government, respectfully, that Humphrey, the philosophy...
Aren't you asking us to distort it a different way?
I think we're
Neither the king, nor Parliament, nor prime ministers, England at the time of the founding, ever had a unqualified removal power. You're asking us to say that at a time, the founding, when the Constitution doesn't speak about this at all, where there was robust debate over this issue among legal scholars at the time, that we ourselves has said repeatedly in Humphreys and other cases, Wiener, even in Myers, that those cases you mentioned did not establish this absolute power of the president. You're asking us to destroy the structure of government and to take away from Congress its ability to protect its idea that the government is better structured with some agencies that are independent.
I think we're asking the court to return to the dominant line of authority that started in Ex parte Henin in 1839, when this court said that it's a settled and well understood construction of the Constitution. The president alone can remove executive officials. That was reaffirmed in Parsons, for example, where it described it as settled beyond the power of alteration. Again, in Shurtleff, similar language. Myers says the same thing. Free Enterprise Fund, Collins, Seal Law, Trump against the United States, and even Humphrey's executor itself paid lip service to this principle. Humphreys described this power as unrestricted and illimitable. And in order to get out of that rule, which the court has recognized in those 9 decisions, is going back to 1789.
You still haven't answered my question.
John, your thoughts?
Well, yeah. Kagan, I mean, this is an important case, and the liberal justices, and those were that was the best defense of Humphrey's executor, of the sort of the independence from the executive branch you could come up with. But all Kagan was arguing was, gee, this is precedent. She's not saying it was rightly decided. Mm-hmm. She's saying, gee, Why should we be overruling something that was there for a long time?
Right.
Well, Humphrey's executor was passed during the, during the Depression, and during when the whole country is, just frozen with fear and anxiety. And so we were doing a lot of things then that really didn't make a lot of sense. Let's face it, we were in our efforts to get out of this horrid thing that was damaging so many lives.
Right.
But yeah, so I don't think that and there was a real need back then, a felt need to harness big business. So you had this agency that was doing that. So it's hard, as we say in law school, hard cases make bad law. You come up with a tough situation, and oftentimes there's a bad decision in order to remedy this perceived individual wrong, rather than giving a rule that would be better for all time. And so the only argument that is being made here is it's precedent. We don't care if it's wrong or right. It's we've had it for 90 years. We got to keep it.
Yeah.
And this guy is saying, look, there's other precedents surrounding it that really affirms the idea that the executive should have this limitless power for executive functions, not invading the legislature or the judiciary, but his own branch. Can't the here's what it is. Can't the executive control his own branch? The executive's not coming into the judges and telling you how to decide things. He's not going over to the legislature and telling the legislature how to vote. Those people would get very upset when anybody tells them what to do. But both of them, the legislature and the judiciary, think they can come in and tell the executive what to do. Well,
And
sorry about that. Unfortunately, democracy and the real power should be in the voters who elect that president.
Exactly. And this speaks to the three equal branches of government. So one or two does not have reigning superiority over the other, but they have different functions and what have you, and they should operate within those functions. And I think the American people are starting to get away from that concept, but I think they actually lost the idea of this concept altogether. And what's interesting to me is that how the Chevron deference case that was just heard a few months ago speaks exactly to this very case, where you have bureaucratic agencies that are just willy-nilly making rules that have the effect of law, and no one can do anything about it, basically. So outside of Congress writing a law to override that rule, and it's like, what are we doing, guys? Like, if they're an executive agency, then that falls under the executive branch, and it's the president's authority to override, fire, do whatever needs to be done to correct course of the administration. And so, but the Supreme Court is saying, well, a couple of members of the Supreme Court are saying, nah, we're good. it's like borderline retarded to me. It's just like, what are we doing here? So I want to get your thoughts on how do we get what would be the path to victory to remedy the bureaucratic agencies like this, whether they're independent or under the executive, that yield or wield this power base that is essentially unconstitutional. I want to get your thoughts on that, sir.
Right. You just pointed out, Randy. I mean, this is you have a brilliant pairing here that you just put together, which is you compare. You take Humphrey's executor, which says that the president can't fire anybody, at least or must at least have rational basis, can be reviewed by the courts. And then you have what they call Chevron deference. And for your audience, Chevron deference means that the agency can come up with laws and rules, even if the legislature did not intend that. They can come up with their own interpretation of their own rules as to what's going on, and also their own interpretation of their own regulations that may or may not be good. And no one can do anything about it, including the judiciary. So, but certainly, the combination means that there's all these rules being made that the executive can't do anything about. and the executive can't even. There are some cases, I mean, there's courts are there for a reason. If the legislature creates a body and the body goes beyond its authority and does something wrong, there should be judicial review of that. I mean, the executive's not saying that. And as a matter of fact, the executive often wants that because these agencies run wild.
Yeah.
So when you have a combination of Chevron deference plus the idea from Humphrey's executive that you can't fire these guys, you've got an agency that says, we're going to do whatever the hell we want to do, and no one can stop us.
Yeah.
No one can stop us. We're our own organism. We're growing here like a weed. In essence, we're a cancer on the body politic, and nanner, you can't do anything about it. So you have pointed out, Randy, the two cases that are most concerning, and what's wonderful is that the court is tackling both of them.
Yep.
And Chevron deference is clearly getting whittled down, and I don't know how far the court's going to go on that, but they've whittled it down a bunch. The agency should just not being able to pronounce things that a court can't come up and say, well, wait a second. For instance, the EPA. The EPA comes into office and they say, by the way, we're going to regulate carbon dioxide. That's carbon dioxide as a poisonous gas. So wait a second, Randy. You and I are emitting carbon dioxide as we speak, and the plants in our office are inhaling that carbon dioxide as part of life. And the EPA is coming in and saying, we're going to regulate this as a toxic gas.
Yeah.
So talk about overstepping your authority. But that's the kind of thing we have today. And now you think about, now, wait a second. Now, once you say that you can regulate carbon dioxide, you can now start telling Randy that he can't have gas in his stove. And that's really where we've gone. There are those laws being proposed.
Yeah.
And, you know, so we have so you've got your finger right on something, Randy, that's very important here, and I want you to encourage you to keep going after this. It's very important.
Yes, thank you. We'll do definitely, because it's important for the American people to understand what's going on in the country right now, and with the idea that so many of these bureaucrats and even our judges, they're misconstruing and reinterpreting the Constitution the way they see fit, saying that it's a living document and it changes over time. And it's like, no, it just doesn't. So it's just strange to me. And Congress, they're just lost, and we need to do a better job electing our members of Congress that understand the fundamentals of our society, the fundamentals of our Constitution, and execute that job in passing laws that would support the Constitution. We're getting away from all of this kind of stuff, and we're going to end up looking like England here pretty soon if we keep going down this course. But it is what it is. But John, I want to thank you for being here today, and I truly appreciate you, sir, and the plethora of wisdom and knowledge that you brought for the audience today. This is a great discussion, and I look forward to picking it back up again soon. Tell people where they can follow you and support you, sir.
Well, if they go to postgatebook.com, I keep all my articles there. It's my own form of Substack. So postgatebook.com, I've got maybe 150 articles posted, and it talks a lot about, aspects of my book and so forth. But there's plenty of stuff on there. So postgatebook.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it once again. And be safe out there, and talk to you soon. And Merry Christmas, too. And Happy New Year. I won't talk to you before then.
Merry Christmas to you, Randy. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Take care. God bless you. Ladies and gentlemen, John O'Connor. Hey, great discussion. And I encourage you all to go and listen to that Supreme Court hearing. It is a very fascinating discussion going on, and I know it's mundane and it's boring, and you're like, who wants to spend 2.5 hours? Break it up, let's do it like 20-30 minutes at a time. If you listen to podcasts and stuff like that, treat it like that. So but get an understanding of how how these cases are being decided and what's being discussed and the rationale behind it. Like I said, it's truly fascinating, very intriguing things that are being said. And as you just heard, just a little piece of it, that you have Supreme Court justices that are justifying keeping around the bureaucracy just because it's always been there, type of thing. And it's like, okay, just because it's always been there doesn't mean that it's something that's legal and right and constitutional. This is your opportunity to fix that. Now, another case I would have brought up if I was that gentleman that was speaking on behalf of the administration, I would have brought up Plessy versus Ferguson. Folks, I'm going to jump up out of here. there's your homework assignment there. I'm going to jump up out of here, and we'll catch you all later on in the week. I believe I do have another guest on Friday. So be safe, take care, God bless, and have a... I hope you enjoyed today's program. You can follow, like, share, subscribe on Spotify, Substack, Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, and your news. And also you can download Let the Truth Be Told app on your favorite streaming platforms such as Fire Stick, Apple TV, and Roku. Take care. God bless.